Welcome to Ecstatic Stanzas, an educational series on creativity, community, and writing careers. I'm Evelyn Berry, your girlfriend's favorite poet. Today, we're going to break down the process for publishing creative work in literary journals. I'll be specifically discussing submitting poetry and fiction, but a lot of this advice might also be useful for nonfiction and hybrid writers. Also, if you're looking for specific advice, I advise checking out the chapter of this video most helpful to you. We'll be exploring the practical steps to researching literary journals, choosing the right ones, creating submission packets, writing cover letters, developing strategies for submissions, and even more. Before we dive deep into the process, I thought it would be helpful to explain why you should care about literary journals in the first place. Why do literary journals actually matter? A literary journal can take many forms. It might be called a lot of different things. It might be called a journal, a magazine, a zine, a blog, a publishing platform, or something way more experimental. It may be digital or in print. It may be created, for example, in the form of tweets. It may just appear in your mailbox one poem at a time as a postcard, as is the case for the Hoot Review. Wherever you're publishing your work, it's a way to get your words to readers and to forge a community with writers and editors. When you are publishing individual poems, stories, and essays in literary journals or magazines, this can help authors attract an early audience before publishing a full-length collection or a novel. You get to connect with creative peers, you build a resume that may qualify you for some kind of grant or fellowship or other opportunity. This is a very practical reason for wanting to publish in a literary journal. Literary journals can also be beautiful collections of contemporary work. Your work gets to reside alongside the work of others and be in conversation across the pages. What an honor it is to be published alongside writers that you love, and what an opportunity to discover new writers. Whether you're publishing for prestige or connection, publishing in literary journals is often the first step in developing a creative writing career, especially if you write poems, short stories, or essays. How do you find the right journals? How do writers research literary journals, and how do they determine which publication opportunities are best for them? If you're completely unfamiliar with literary journals, it can feel daunting. How do we know what journals might actually want our work? How do we know who to trust? How do we know to start? Where to even find submission opportunities? If you're at that part of the process, I suggest taking some time to explore and read literary journals. If there's a university where you live, they probably have published issues of literary journals, so that's a great place to start. Many journals also publish online and share their work for free, so there's a huge selection of work to dig into. Of course, it's very tempting to begin by submitting to the big names, right? The ones that you already know. The first time I submitted to a literary journal, it was to the New Yorker, then to the Paris Review, and then finally to a local literary journal. And I actually got published in the final one. And of course I got rejected from the New Yorker, and I never heard back from the Paris Review. I'm still waiting if they want to publish that story I wrote at 15 years old. Maybe they'll send me back my self-addressed and stamped envelope. We will see. If you focus on only submitting work to the most well-known journals, it's highly unlikely you'll get in or even hear back. Besides, the coolest work is published in medium-sized journals or small, weird, hyper-specific journals. In those venues, you can find not just other writers, but your people. I have developed relationships with writers with whom I was published and editors from years ago, and I still keep up or even just hang out with these folks. They're really amazing, lovely folks. If you're curious about what kind of journal might appeal to you, I suggest checking out the journals in which your favorite writers publish. If the writer is a poet, short story writer, or essayist, they probably have an acknowledgments page in the back of the book in which they list all of the venues that previously published the work from that book. I'm going to put my acknowledgements page here, just an example. You can use this page as a guide to find and read the venues where they've published, not just their own, but also the work of other writers, right? This is a really great way of thinking about the kinds of journals to which you might want to submit. If a journal is publishing work by writers you love, then that journal might be a great fit for you. When you're researching and reading journals, ask yourself first whether you actually like the work there. If you don't actually like the work that the journal publishes, why would you want to be published in it? Further, ask whether your work might fit in there. Do you think that your work could be in conversation with the other work published in one of their issues? It's okay to realize the journal isn't right for you. There are plenty of literary journals I enjoy reading to which I don't bother to submit because our aesthetic tastes are too different. There are a lot of things you'll want to consider, all of which come down to personal preference or taste. Ask yourself, is there a submission fee? And if so, am I comfortable paying? Does this journal pay? And if not, am I comfortable with not being paid? Is the journal professional, by which I mean how do they treat their authors? Do they respond in a timely manner, or do they have good professional reputations? To what extent does this journal support the writers it publishes? Does it share good news from writers who publish books or publish elsewhere? For me, this is a major factor in determining which journals to which I submit. I want to publish with literary journals who care about the authors they publish, beyond even the work published in a particular issue. Another aspect of personal preference is whether the journal publishes online or in print. With the cost of printing rising so dramatically, more and more journals are publishing their work solely on the internet. Sometimes this means sharing a poem on a website or blog, sometimes within a downloadable PDF, and sometimes available through an e-reader software like Issue, or even just like on social media I've seen. For a really long time, writers argued about the hierarchy of print versus online journals, but in today's era, it isn't really necessarily an indicator of a journal's quality, and honestly, it never really was. The snobbishness around publishing print has dwindled, which means that the choice to submit to online journals versus in-print journals is one of preference. If you submit to a print journal, it's incredibly cool and rewarding and affirming to see your name like literally in print. You get to hold a book in your hand and you're part of it. On the flip side, it's much harder for folks to actually read your work since it's not readily available unless they subscribe to that journal or buy the journal. Ironically, many of the poems that get printed in physical journals get shared on social media only after the author posts a photo of it, right, online. Now, online journals conversely allow you to more easily share your work directly with readers. You can click on a link and easily read what someone has written. Digital journals can also allow more creativity in poetic form, including poems that use the language of the computer, GIFs and animation and hypertext, to rethink the poem. It's also led to a rise of journals that include videos or recordings of writers reading their work. But the internet isn't forever, so no matter what your parents might have told you, it's possible that even a well-respected journal will one day go dark and delete your work from the face of the earth. For myself and other writers, there is a cemetery of past work that has been kind of quietly erased because journals have gone out of print. One of the more controversial aspects of deciding whether to send work to a journal are submission fees. I mentioned these earlier. Many journals charge submission fees and many do not. In general, submission fees help the journal pay for the functioning of the journal. This website fees, printing costs, paying authors, paying fees for submission portals like Submittable, and typical submission fees range from $3 to $5 with the exception of contest entries, which might range instead from $10 to $30, sometimes more. As a writer, you must decide for yourself to what extent you're comfortable paying to submit work and what price range with which you're comfortable, right? So personally, I wouldn't submit to an open call submission for $10, but I might submit to a contest for $15 if I felt like I had a real chance of winning. I think it's important to remember that if a journal is asking for a submission fee, they are not trying to fleece you. This is not a scam. More than likely, they're just trying to keep the lights on. So don't get mad at them, just don't submit to them. When considering journals, you might also want to ask yourself whether that journal feels sustainable. Plenty of journals start up and burn out in 1 or 2 years. If you're submitting to an online journal, for example, like I mentioned earlier, can you be certain your work will remain available for a long time? It's okay if this just doesn't matter to you, but I think it's a question you should ask yourself. I've published plenty of new journals and plenty of long-standing journals, and I gotta say, one is not necessarily better than the other, besides the fact that longevity can sometimes speak for itself. And finally, when you're looking for a new journal, do you agree with the ethics of a journal? I know this won't matter to some people, but it definitely matters to me. I don't want to publish with, editors who have a history of abuse or racism. I don't want to publish alongside well-known abusers in the literary community. I don't want to publish with journals that don't stand up to racism or transphobia or genocide. For me, that's a line I draw in the sand. What kind of ethics do you want to see with the people with whom you publish? Remember, when you publish with someone, they represent your values as much as you represent theirs. I research literary journal opportunities online using websites like Submittable, Duotrope, ChillSubs, and LitNotice. Submittable is perhaps the most popular submission manager and serves as a place for writers to discover publishing and funding opportunities. A submission manager allows the staff at a literary journal to monitor, read, provide feedback on, and discuss submissions. They can also help the staff track the status of a submission, whether it's been read and by whom. Each journal has a slightly different process, but a submission manager can help streamline everything. For the author, Submittable offers the ability to explore open submission opportunities, track active submissions, and connect directly with literary journal staff. The major drawback of Submittable is that it only includes journals that use Submittable, which means that if a journal uses a different submission manager or operates via email, you probably won't find it on the Submittable Discover tab. Duotrope is a more established platform that includes a wider array of possibilities, but does so for a small monthly fee. Similarly, LitNotice is a paid service that provides curated lists of open submission opportunities based on your interests. It can help take the pain out of researching hundreds of journals and keeping track of submission window schedules. My favorite website out of all of these is a relative newcomer to the scene called ChillSubs. This is a free service that allows journals of all kinds to self-submit info about themselves and their open submission windows. In addition to these websites, you might consider signing up for the newsletters that share submission opportunities like new pages. My favorite of these kinds of services is the Poetry Bulletin by Emily Stoddard. I find it really helpful. Her Substack has helped me connect with loads of really cool opportunities. You can also learn about where to submit from literary journals themselves. Heavy Feather Review has a where to submit page with opportunities including literary journals, contests, chapbooks, and press submissions. I also learn about a lot of literary journals just by following writers on social media. Usually when a submission window opens, I share these kind of posts to my Instagram stories, and a lot of my friends do too. So in this way, I think it's really important to signal boost all of these kinds of opportunities that might help writers who are in your community. So there's lots of ways to kind of find out about these submissions and how to find them. So after you've asked yourself these questions, you've researched literary journals, what I suggest doing is composing a list of 5 to 10 journals that are possible contenders. Begin with maybe 3 to 5 that you vibe with the most to begin the process. And then comes the really, really scary part where you actually have to submit your work. What do literary journals look for? As a writer, how can you be sure the journal to which you are submitting might actually like your work? It feels impossible at first. Creative writing is subjective, so it's really hard to say whether your work is up to snuff. It's even harder to determine whether the readers or the editors of a literary journal might be partial to your tastes and your general vibe. But don't fear, that's what I'm here for. We're going to next discuss how to determine what journals actually want from you, and we're going to dive into some examples from real contemporary literary journals who are kind of talking about, hey, this is what we publish. Okay. The best way to learn about a journal's preferences is to read them and also to read about them. Many journals explicitly tell you what kind of work they like, whether it's on their about page or often on their submissions page. Pay attention to what the journal is asking for in terms of content, genre, and form. Some journals publish plot-centric stories, while others relish experimental fiction. Some journals accept shape poetry, others detest it. Some journals have a regional identity or an identity-based journal, or maybe it's a topic-based interest. So, for example, some journals in the American South only publish or prefer to publish writers from the American South. And then other journals publish African American writers. There's even a journal called Boomerlit that you probably can guess only publishes writers of the Boomer generation. So, there's a lot of possibilities. Some journals only publish creative work about particular topics, like animals or food or art or fashion. Don't submit to journals that don't want your work. Read the submission guidelines and also, of course, actually read samples of work from the journal itself. That's the best way to see examples of what the journal is likely to publish. Look at what they've already published. I told you I'd share some examples, so let's take a look at 3 journals to get a sense of what to expect when exploring literary journals, right? You're on the website, you're trying to figure out, what do you want? What do you want from me? The first literary journal we'll explore is Beloit Poetry Journal. What you'll notice right away from the name of the journal is that this journal only accepts and publishes poetry, which means, like, if you're a fiction writer, you might instead submitting to Beloit Fiction Journal. And yes, that is like actually the name of the other journal. But you don't want to submit fiction to the poetry journal, not poetry to the fiction journal. Here's what's shared on the submission page of Beloit Poetry Journal. We're open to a wide range of forms and styles in contemporary poetry. We're always watching for new poets, quickened language, and work that offers a fresh purchase on the political or social landscape. This is a pretty typical example of what you can find on a submission page or an About Us page. So what do we learn here, right? We learned that the journal is open to a variety of forms and styles with a specific interest, though not limitation, in work that explores a political or social issue, especially from a new point of view. Okay, let's look at another literary journal. This journal is called Clarkesworld. You may have heard of it. It's a well-known journal that publishes science fiction and fantasy short stories, interviews, articles, and audio fiction. And it's known for a lot of work that has won the Hugo Award and a lot of other prestigious awards. So it's a really cool journal. I'm not a sci-fi writer. I'm not a fantasy writer. So of course I know right away, I'm not going to submit to Clarkesworld, but I do like reading it. So from this description, right, we can understand there's some genre specificities, right? If we write literary, realistic stories or formal poetry, this is not the right journal for me. But if I write stories about aliens, hey, Clarkesworld is where you might want to be. Now, in the submission guidelines, Clarkesworld notes that the science fiction doesn't have to be like hard science fiction, meaning it can have elements of science fiction without creating a completely new world. But they do include a list of what they describe as hard sells, which include topics including viscera, sexy vampires, demonic children, zombies, military propaganda, political propaganda, or talking cats, which I guess are just cliches in the sci-fi and fantasy world. I encourage you to check out the full list, if only just to kind of get a good laugh about those cliches. Now, you know, they share this whole list on their website of like, no-nos, don't submit this stuff. And some of us might be a little freaked out by that. But I think it can be helpful because, you know, these literary journals, they're reading hundreds or, in Clarkesworld's case, thousands of stories a year. So they know what is cliche and overdone. And honestly, I'm like the kind of writer who really loves when editors have strong opinions, even if I don't agree with those opinions, because it helps me figure out, what I think and what I believe in the context of their ideas. So I think it actually is really helpful if they say, don't submit this kind of stuff. We'll take a final look at one more journal submission suggestions, this time Taco Bell Quarterly. And rather than try to explain the vibe of this journal, I'm just going to literally read word for word what they have shared on their submission page. Taco Bell Quarterly seeks literary, creative, short stories, essays, fiction or prose poems, comics, art, one-act plays, fever dreams, multimedia, stupid status updates, criticisms, manifestos, recipes, and anything else that explores any and all elements of Taco Bell. Or not. Shoehorn a chalupa in your short story, maybe we'll love it. An elegy for the discontinued menu items, fine. An experimental essay about marine biology and the XXL grilled stuffed burrito, awesome. Review the new beefy Fritos burrito and how it reminds you of the time your grandma died. We want it. Something introduces us to inventive form, dynamic language, and strong voice. Or perhaps it does none of the above. We're not judgy and pretentious. We're the Taco Bell fucking Quarterly. We lean towards pieces that are queer and center their pain, joy in a Taco Bell. Okay, so you kind of get the idea, right? They want things that are related to Taco Bell. And in the next paragraph, which I'm not going to read, they clarified that they are not, in fact, associated in any real way with the corporation known as Taco Bell. So just a few helpful examples of just the gamut of what literary journals are looking for. And not all literary journals are stuffy. Not all of them are even looking for your best work. There are thousands of journals in the world, which means that there's definitely one that's totally right for you. And as a final note, before we get into the specifics of submitting, remember that publishing is a relationship, right? The journal is assessing your work, but you should also assess the work and the worth of the journal. So submit to publications that align with your values and sense of taste. And in those journals, you will find your community. You will find your people. And who knows, maybe one of those journals we discussed today, Beloit Poetry Journal or Clark's World or Taco Bell Quarterly, is the perfect one for you. We're going to chat next about some extreme nuance and practicalities for submitting creative work. First, we'll be talking about submitting poetry. I'm going to share kind of what I do to prepare to submit to literary journals. Most of the work of submission, after all, comes long before you actually hit the button that says submit. And this process is a little bit different for poetry and prose. So we're going to specifically discuss preparing poems and then prose for publication. So formatting with either can be a little difficult depending on the submission guidelines. And we'll kind of talk about both just so we can understand those nuances. Okay, so first of all, at this point in the process, you've probably identified some of your best pieces. If not, do that. So I keep most of my submittable pieces in a Google Docs file. I call it publishable poems or submission poems 2025. The first question and the most important question is, do these poems slap? Are they actually good enough? Are they up to the standard to be published? Or are they up to the standard of what I'm hoping to put out into the world? If I still feel uneasy about the poem being read or being out, in a reader's hands, maybe I shouldn't submit it. Remember, once you submit it and publish it, that work might represent you as a writer forever. So make sure that you, as the writer, feel comfortable with these possibly being the final drafts of your work. Not all journals allow you to continue editing after they've accepted. And if you feel like you still might want to revise them, don't put them in that folder that says ready to publish. The other quality that makes a poem publishable is something really simple. Has this poem been published before? Most literary journals do not accept previously published work. So if you've had your work appear in another anthology, journal, newspaper, or even just on social media, that poem or short story is probably not eligible to be published again. Most journals want what are called first North American serial rights to your work. And this just means that they are the first to publish it in North America. After you've created this document, the publishable document, you'll want to kind of organize it. Group poems with similar themes or forms or vibes, put them together. Maybe these poems are part of a series. Maybe they were like about the same person, or maybe they're all sestinas or all sonnets. Consider which poems you'd like to see published together, right? Which might kind of converse with one another if they are published together on the page, not just in a book. When submitting packets of 3 to 5 poems, you want to use those groupings to guide you, right? It's a really easy way to preemptively separate the groups of poems and say, okay, I want to send, poems that are about nature. And then I go to my nature poem section and I say, okay, easy to send out those. You also want to look at how many and what kind of poems the journal is asking for. In general, they will ask you for like 3 to 5 poems. So generally I might identify like 5 poems that are a good fit for those journals. And of course, like I said earlier, if you're curious about what journals are actually looking to publish, check out their About page. You want to copy and paste into a new file that's ready for that. Make sure that the formatting of the poem is consistent, especially if you're writing something that's a bit more experimental. And then you also want to make sure that each poem appears on its own page. Really practical kit. Rather than using like the enter key to separate work, use Control plus Enter. And this way, if your editor like translates your document into a different form, like a PDF, the layout of the pages will remain intact. I know we're getting into like really nuanced stuff. Many journals will also ask you to submit in a PDF or a Word form. And listen, not everyone actually has access to either of those, but if you want to do that, you can just use a free feature in Google Docs to download as a Word document or PDF, and make sure just like double check to make sure it looks normal. And also you'll want to save using a unique name for the journal. So for example, if I'm submitting poems to the Taco Bell Quarterly, that document might be titled Taco Bell Quarterly - Poetry Submission. Sometimes journals will include specific guidelines for naming these documents, like, hey, we want your like first letter of your first name and then your last name and then whatever. So double check, right, that you are following their submission guidelines. Double check that the version of your document that you have downloaded is correctly laid out and formatted. And once you've gotten your document prepared, you are ready to submit poetry. Short stories. It's very similar, slightly different story. Of course, the most important first step is to pay attention to the submission guidelines. Determine what genre of story a magazine publishes and what range of word count it accepts. So if a magazine only accepts stories up to 5,000 words, make sure you're submitting a story that's 5,000 words or less. If your story is like 7,000 words, don't submit to that magazine. Find a different magazine that accepts stories that are up to 5,000 words or longer, or 7,000 words and longer. Now, similarly, you want to ensure that the genre you're submitting to actually aligns with the magazine publishes. I know that sounds like obvious advice, but it happens all the time that, you might take a literary story and send it to a sci-fi magazine, or a sci-fi and send it to a horror magazine. Don't do that. When you've identified which story you want to submit, usually they only accept one, sometimes more, you'll want to actually format the document correctly. So you want to make sure the story is written in a reasonable font. You usually can't go wrong with Times New Romans, and most journals also accept fonts like Arial or Calibri. The font should feel unremarkable, if at all possible. You want the editors to be paying attention to your writing choices, right? Not the choices of your like stylistic cool font. Set your margins on the document to 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. Ensure text is left aligned and double spaced. This is all pretty standard, unless, of course, they ask for something really specific in their journals. Also, sometimes with short stories, journals will ask for specific information on the first page, so maybe page numbers or including your word count or your contact information on the title page of the story. So read those submission guidelines and make sure to pay attention to what they're asking you to do. Many journals will also ask you to submit in PDF or Word. Like I said earlier, if you didn't watch the poetry portion, if you don't have access to those, it's really easy to make one. You go to Google Docs, put your document in there, and then download as a Word document or a PDF document, save using a unique file name related to the journal or magazine to which you'll be submitting. So, for example, if I'm submitting a short story to the Paris Review, that document might read Paris Review -fiction submission. Sometimes journals will include specific guidelines for naming these documents, so look out for that. Double check also that the downloaded version of the document, whether it's PDF or Word, maintains the preferred layout and formatting. Overall, when submitting a short story, keep in mind that your writing, not your formatting, should stand out to the editor. So you want things to be uniform and unremarkable. You want your writing to be remarkable. You want your writing to be the thing that grabs their attention. Because if you submit in like Comic Sans with all these weird margins, they'll just focus on that and they might not even read the piece. Let's talk about submission guidelines and the etiquette of submitting to literary journals. No matter what genre you're submitting, there exist guidelines and also a kind of generally accepted etiquette for submitting to journals. And I know that it's not always laid out, so I'm going to lay it out for you right here. When a journal opens for submissions, they share submission guidelines. These can usually be found on the journal website or sometimes on their submittable page or their submission manager, whatever they use. Journals often share specific info about the themes and the genres they accept for each issue. And if you want to dive deeper into that, I suggest scrolling back and watching that part of this video. Typical submission guidelines include discussions of submission length, right? So are you going to send 1 or 3 poems? Is it a 2,000 word or 5,000 word story? They also discuss simultaneous submissions, previously published work, and notes about how best to share work with editors. Most importantly, pay attention to the deadline. If you want to be considered for publication, don't miss the deadline. Most journals use digital or email submissions, though some still require mailed submissions. If you are submitting by mail, which you probably won't ever, but if you are, there are some that still need this, you may be requested to include what's called a self-addressed stamped envelope or a SACE, which assures that the submission will be returned to you. The submission length, right, which we've discussed a little bit before, might mean a word count for prose or a number of poems for poetry, or even a certain number of lines. So sometimes they say, hey, 14 lines or less, we're going to only publish really short poems. Many journals will not publish previously published work, and that includes any work published on your social media or personal website. That is considered previously published. Of course, there are exceptions, but only 3% of lit journals accept previously published work, so generally, no. Some journals will also request that you wait a certain amount of time before submitting again. So if you submit and get rejected, which happens all the time, just check to make sure to see if there's a policy on this. Now let's talk about what simultaneous submissions are. Simultaneous submissions refers to when a writer sends the same piece to multiple publication venues. So you've written a story, you sent it to 5 different places. Pay special attention to whether journals allow simultaneous submissions. If they do not, which is pretty rare, you need to wait to be rejected or accepted before submitting the work elsewhere. Even if they do accept simultaneous submissions, you will need to withdraw work if it is accepted elsewhere. And we'll chat about that process in just one moment. When you're writing to a journal and you're submitting somewhere that does not allow simultaneous submissions, I think something to consider is whether it's worth giving that venue sole consideration for the time it will take to hear back, which might be between 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer. On the plus side, some journals that do not encourage simultaneous submissions will get back to you like way faster for that reason. So again, it's about personal preference. It's about what you want to do. There's also etiquette to consider after the submission has gone out. So if your work gets accepted and you've sent it to 5 different places, there are some immediate steps to take. So first of all, you want to respond to the acceptance with confirmation that your work is still available. Say, hey, thank you. Yes, this is still available. I'd be delighted if it was in the new issue of X Journal. I often send a brief thank you note, and I might ask about next steps, like what they might need from me. And typically managing editors will reach out to request your information, which might include things like a headshot, a bio, and if the journal pays, some payment information, or even like a recording of you reading your work. If a journal accepts your piece, make sure to withdraw it from anywhere else you have submitted that piece. It's considered like super rude to not withdraw, especially if that journal wants to accept your piece. Like imagine, you ask 2 different people on a date and both of them say yes, and then you show up to the restaurant with both of them. That's bad, right? And if you do that, probably neither of those people want to go on a date with you. The same is true of journals. You don't want to get accepted only to be revealed like, hey, actually, I was already accepted elsewhere and I forgot to tell you. So you can use the submission portal or just email the editor to share this withdrawal note. Usually there's a note in the submission guidelines about how best to do this if a journal accepts simultaneous submissions. And if you're unsure what to do or what to say with your withdrawal, right, it's kind of an awkward thing. Like, hey, thank you for asking me out. However, so I'm already going to the dance with someone else. This is what I write. I'm reaching out to withdraw X poem or story because it has been accepted elsewhere. I would like, however, for the other poems or stories to remain under consideration. Thank you for your continued work and attention. It's brief, it's polite, it's professional. Acceptance is wonderful, but what do we do when our work gets rejected, right? It can hurt to get rejected. It can feel personal, like a rejection, not of a creative piece, but of ourselves. Remember, rejection is normal and common. You will likely be rejected many more times than you are accepted. And remember, this happens to everyone. Every single writer deals with a lot of rejection. Do not respond to the rejection with a mean comment or something disparaging about the editor. Most editors or literary journal readers read hundreds or thousands of submissions and unfortunately won't have the time to respond personally to every piece or provide feedback. Sometimes, however, you will receive personalized rejection, which means that someone at the journal liked your work and fought for it to be published, but it didn't make the final cut. Often it's like a group decision or a committee decision. Take a personalized rejection as encouragement to submit again and keep submitting. And if you do submit again, make sure to say, hey, you said you liked my work more. Here's a little bit more. Please consider it. So when your work is rejected, stay calm, keep writing, revising, submitting your work. It might help to take a step back, consider whether this work, whether it's a story or poem, is ready to actually be published, or whether the places you're sending it are the right places before you resubmit it elsewhere. When you're submitting to literary journals, keep in mind that this is a professional communication, right? You're both asking for journals to take on a chance on your work, and you're offering them the opportunity to publish you. So, the number one kind of etiquette tip I'd give for, going into starting to submit work is just think of this in a very professional manner. You will be needing to communicate that way. When you're submitting, you're going to probably have to write a cover letter. What is a cover letter, you might be asking, and how do you actually write one? Okay, let's get into some specifics about how to write a professional cover letter and third-person bio. The cover letter is a short introductory letter to you and your work. Although not every journal or magazine requires a cover letter, learning to write one will be useful to learning how to submit your work. Your cover letter is not the place to show off your fancy metaphors, but should rather be direct and professional. Remember, editors might have to read dozens of these cover letters a day or every week, so writing something overly long or complicated might just distract them from the awesomeness of your creative work. So stick to the basics. Although there are slight variations depending on what you're submitting and where, these letters follow a particular template. And I'm going to put that template right here. Okay, let's get into the specifics of this. So at the beginning of the cover letter, name the editor or the poetry editors. If there are multiple editors, include all of the names, and especially pay attention to whether there is a genre editor, whether it's a poetry editor, a fiction editor, a nonfiction editor, in addition to the editor-in-chief. Make sure to spell the names of the editors correctly. If you're trying to find the name of a journal editor, try looking for the word masthead on their website. While some journals are fine with you simply writing "Dear Editors," I usually err on the side of caution to signal that I've done my due diligence of having learned who this journal is and who I'm submitting to. In your opening paragraph, state your purpose, right? So what you want to communicate is that you wish to submit X work to literary magazines. So for example, you might write, "Please consider the enclosed poems for publication in Ecstatic Stanzas review." Or you might name the work explicitly, "Please consider the publication of one or more of the following poems: Bloom, Ghost Town, Nunchuck Sonnet, and Still Life with Diving Duck in the upcoming issue of Cool Kids Review." Once you've stated your purpose, follow this with a note about simultaneous submissions. So if you're submitting your story or poems or essay to any other venues, make sure that the editors are aware of this. Just say, "Hey, just to note, I'm submitting this simultaneously." Sometimes in the next paragraph, you might include a note about why you're submitting to this journal. This isn't necessary, but it can be nice to remind an editor that you've met before at a reading or a conference, or to let them know what work they've published that you enjoy. So say, "Hey, I read this story that you published. I really liked it, and I thought I might also be a good fit." And finally, include relevant info to assure editors you've read the submission guidelines. So for example, you might write, "I've included a third-person bio and contact information below as requested." Thank the editor for their time and for reading your work. That's just a nice thing to do. And then you can close out the cover letter by sharing an optional salutation, with your name and your contact information, followed by a third-person bio. Sometimes journals will encourage you to include more personal notes in your cover letter, details about your life or how you heard about the journal. So make sure, like always, to take your cues from the submission page. Read the submission page. And every journal is different. So before you use the template that I just provided, pay attention to what the journal asks. That is the first thing. So for the sake of clarity, I actually want to share a recent example of a real cover letter that I have used, and I did change the name of the editors in the journal. "Dear Mark Allen and Caitlin Bennett, please consider Pierogi Love Story for publication in the next issue of Cool Kids Review. Some of these poems are simultaneously submitted, and if one is offered publication elsewhere, I'll notify you as soon as possible. I've been interested in sending work to your journal for a while and thought this story fit this issue's theme of creative work about pierogies. I've included a third-person bio below. I appreciate you taking the time to review this submission. Warmly, Evelyn." And then I would include my bio like this. Evelyn Berry, she, her, is a trans-Southern writer, editor, and educator. She's the author of Grief Slut, Sundress Publications 2024, and Buggery, Bateau Press 2020. Winner of the Boom Chapbook Prize. She's a recipient of a 2023 National Endowment for the Arts Poetry Fellowship and 2025 Individual Artist Fellowship in Poetry. Her work has appeared in Beloit Poetry Journal, South Carolina Review, Gigantic Sequins, Moist, Taco Bell Quarterly, and elsewhere. She lives in Columbia, South Carolina. At the end of this cover letter, so I just included a bio. You saw that bio. And often that's the actual bio that will be used if the work is accepted. It might also help orient editors to who I am and what I do. So let's chat about the third person bio. And here's a really important note. Every now and again, you will be asked for a first-person bio, but it is way, way, way more likely that you'll be asked for a third-person bio, which means that you'll be writing about yourself using third-person pronouns rather than using I. Here is a simple template for creating your own bio. So, name is author, living in city, state. She's the recipient, winner of X kinds of prizes and fellowships, etc. Her work has appeared in External. She is a poetry reader for External. She is the secretary of X nonprofit. Okay, so you're going to begin with your name. Who are you? You can, if you would like, include your pronouns in parentheses. I usually do. If you've published a book or many books, include these in the first or second sentence. It's really relevant information. You might also include a line about your education if you, for example, have an MFA or an English degree. I do not, so I don't mention any education. Next, you want to brag on yourself a little. So have you ever won an award where you're published in a literary journal? Tell us where they can find you, right? Tell us if you've already been involved in the literary world. Like, for example, if you are a reader or an editor for another kind of literary journal, if you're on the board of a literary organization, or if you just like volunteer in your community and you're involved in any way. You can also optionally include where you live and what you like to do. When writing your bio, it's very important to be brief and professional. Include relevant information. So that's education, honors, positions, up to maybe 5 previous publications, and 1 or 2 fun facts is fine, but it's best not to overdo it. And some journals are, of course, open to like really creative bios. But for me, one of the tells of an amateur writer is an overly long bio, right? You are not giving your life story. You're just giving a little bit of context about who you are. And I want to mention also, it's totally okay if you've never won anything or published anywhere. And if so, keep the bio short and sweet. You can just say you are a writer and where you live, as well as any other relevant details about who you are. So if that were me, and when I was kind of starting out, I might just say, Evelyn Berry is a writer living in South Carolina. Simple, right? Very simple. Every journal is different and may expect something a little different. So make sure to review what the journal is asking you to include in that cover letter and in that bio, and then revise accordingly. Always, always, always look at the submission guidelines and make sure that you are responding and writing in a professional manner. That is going to make all of the difference when you are actually submitting your work to literary journals. Okay, so we have covered a lot of the logistics of submitting creative work to literary journals, but what are the strategies for submitting? What advice might I have for writers looking to submit their work? Here is my advice enumerated. Number 1, think of journal submissions as a numbers game. Don't be discouraged by rejection, because rejection is inevitable. The more often you're rejected, the more often you will find success. Number 2, submit broadly. Don't submit your poems to only one journal. You might be waiting for months to hear back, or maybe even more than a year. Instead, send the same packet of poems to 2 to 5 journals or even more. If all those journals reject these poems, revisit them, revise them, and then submit again. And especially at the beginning of your career, submit to more than just your dream journals. You do not want to waste your time waiting to hear back from the Paris Review when your poem or story might find a home somewhere else that will connect you with readers. Number 3, patience is key. Some journals will take months to get back to you. This doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be rejected. It just might mean that editors are still highly considering your work. It can be frustrating, but every writer goes through this. 4, services like Duotrope and Submittable allow you to chart out which journals will be open for submission when. Many journals maintain the same submission period annually. So do your research. Look up journals to which you'd like to submit, and if they're not open to submission right now, figure out their regular submission schedules and prepare submission packets ahead of time. Maybe even consider scheduling reminders in your phone or on whatever kind of calendar that you use. 5, don't wait until the deadline. Although some journals scramble the work that they consider, others read it in the order that they receive it, which means that your work will stand out more if the editors read it early in the submission period rather than in a bushel of hundreds of submissions. This depends, of course, on how people actually read submissions, but it can't hurt to send in your work early. And 6, schedule a submission date with yourself or others. So make sure to set aside time to submit to journals. Go to a cafe, a bar, stay at home. I have in the past hosted a submission party where I got my friends together. We got drunk and we submitted our work. So these are my kind of final pieces of advice for submitting your work to literary journals. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope that you will see your work placed out in the world. Remember that when you're submitting to these places, we are able to attract an audience. We're able to connect with the writing community, and we are able to build toward, publishing a full manuscript. You are a real writer, so I hope that you will share your work. I hope that you will submit your work, and I hope that one day I get to read it.